ahead. Okay, welcome back to the Girl Like a Mother podcast. Today I have Jen Rafferty with me. She's an educator and author and founder of the Empowered Educator. Jen started as a middle school music teacher. For 15 years, she did that in central New York, and she's known for bringing her energy, humor, and expertise in her presentations while inspiring educators to stay connected to their why. Jen's a certified emotional intelligence practitioner, and she's currently pursuing her Ph.D. in educational psychology. I'll tell you a little bit more about her organization. Since its inception, the Empowered Educator has reached teachers and leaders all over the world. Jen's been featured in Authority Magazine, Medium, Thrive Global, Voyage MIA, and she was on the TEDx stage with her talk, Generational Change Begins with Empowered Teachers. She's also the host of a podcast, which I hope you go and sign up to listen to. It's called Take Notes with Jen Rafferty, and it's actually rated in the top 3 of podcasts globally, which is so cool. Welcome to the show, Jen. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Jill. And I also have to say, with all of that, I think one of the most important things that's relevant to this conversation is that I'm also a mom of 2.
Woohoo!
Yes, I have right now, at the time of recording, a 9-year-old and a just 12-year-old.
Oh, wow, that's fun. That's a fun age. I feel like you're kind of in this sweet spot between like kids, babies, toddlers, and like who need you all the time, and then teenagers who want nothing to do with you because I've got both ends of the spectrum right now. It's like 4-year-olds and 14-year-olds and everything in between, and it's wild.
Yeah, it's definitely that. They're still my snuggle bugs and exploring maybe what it's like to be a proper teenager, but not quite yet.
Right. There's lots of time for that.
Yeah.
Lots
Yeah.
of time. Okay,
Mhm.
so I guess my first question is like, how do you manage having this thriving career and all of this this work where you need to be energetic and present and this sort of motivator and supporter for the people that you're helping? How can you manage that and being a parent? Do you have time for you anywhere in there? What's it look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think historically and traditionally, we look at all of these areas in our life of being very compartmentalized. And I will be honest, when I came into this work, I would tell you that I was a proud compartmentalizer. I felt like, when I was at work, I just took out the work drawer and I put on that hat. And then I went home, I took on the wife hat or the parent. And that was something I was really proud of. And looking back, a lot of that was actually fear and a trauma response to just figuring out how to live life with this idea that I constantly had to balance everything. And with that perspective, I think we set ourselves up for failure because there isn't any sort of perfect balance. It doesn't exist. There is no balancing. And even now, that imagery of balance feels very stressful in my body. Thinking of spinning plates up in the air or juggling balls, just so stressful. So for me, I really started to switch this idea from work-life balance to work-life blend. And as I started to think about what it meant to blend all of these areas in my life, the pressure just started to go away because sometimes work would require more of me. Sometimes my family would require more of me. And sometimes I needed my alone time. And this blends allows for that fluidity and gives me permission to experience all of that without the guilt.
Mm, I love that. And I love, first of all, the word just feels so like, I don't know, like I'm moving. For those who are listening, I'm just like, it does feel fluid. That word blend just feels like everything can weave together in a more seamless way. But I want to acknowledge that you learned and changed as you went, which is so cool, right? Because in the beginning, you were compartmentalizing and that was working for you, or you thought it was. And as you learned and grew, you were able to change things to make them even better, even if things were already working. We can always readjust, look back, see what's working, learn, implement. And so I really love that you were able to transition and find something that really worked for you and that helps a lot of other people now that you're talking about it and sharing it. Because I mean, I always like to say balance is a verb, which is kind of the same thing that you're saying, right? Like you're never truly there. You can't always have perfect balance in everything.
Yeah, and I think this learning is the whole name of the game. We're living, so we're growing. And if we're reflective in our lives and the way that we operate, just because something's working doesn't mean that it's in highest service
Yeah,
of you. And so, yeah, it was totally working for me. And it was causing a lot of stress. And it was causing a lot of unnecessary pressure, and it was continuing to give in to that emotional addiction to overwhelm that I would have, that where I felt like, yeah, I could really thrive under something. Also, I'd kind of wear this badge of honor. But as I started to make different choices in my life that allowed me to slow down and really be reflective, the question wasn't, is this working for me? The question was, is this serving me? And that is a very different type of question, because yes, it was working, but no, it wasn't serving me. And because it wasn't serving me, then I got to ask some things of like, well, how do I want to feel? What would serve me right? Became the path that I went down, and that's still the path that I walk down every day.
I love it. I love it. That's so important that you, I mean, so many of us struggle with that and naming that thing and claiming that thing that's like, what's important, what's working, is it serving me? That's the crux of it, isn't it? Like, sure, we can go through our life in a way that checks all the shoulds, right? But if it's not actually improving your life, if it's not adding value and making things better and helping you in some way, then it's really just somebody else's formula. And I wanted to talk to you as well about like the shoulds and the supposed tos that moms face. And I really feel like it keeps us from being fully satisfied in our lives. And I want your perspective on that.
For sure. The shoulds and supposed tos come always from a place of judgment. If you're catching yourself saying those words, it's a beautiful opportunity for you to stop and notice, is that so interesting that I just should it on myself, right? That I just use those words. Whose should is this? And that's a really important question to ask, because chances are it's not yours. And when you really stop to think about it, and I'll give you a perfect example. In 2020, along with the world shutting down, I was going through a divorce, and part of that experience led me to reflect on my life in ways that I couldn't avoid anymore, because I was, along with everybody else, in isolation, alone with my thoughts and my children. And so I had this idea of needing to make this big, beautiful, robust dinner every night. And when I didn't, it was this, Jen, you really should be doing this for your kids. And it wasn't until, again, I started really getting curious about my language, particularly in this internal dialogue, that I started asking myself, well, whose should it is? Well, that was my mother's should. My mother valued having a big, robust dinner at the end of the day. And what's even more interesting about that, it might not have even been hers. It might have even been her mother's, and the mother and her mother before that, my great 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 grandmother. And so we pass down these traditions that become our internal stories of how we are supposed to, and I'm using quotes right here, operate in this world. But one of the things that we say a lot in Empowered Educator is tradition is really just peer pressure from dead people. And I will tell you, I'm not knocking tradition. Tradition can be great, but tradition leads you down a path of living somebody else's life and moving away from who you can become and want to become.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. That languaging tradition is just peer pressure from dead people. I mean, I love that. You mentioned the educated, empowered educator program that you've got. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that came to be, why you built it up, and sort of the work that you're doing now?
Sure. So, you know, as I mentioned, I was going through this divorce in 2020. I was teaching music and I loved it. I really believed that that was something that I was going to do for my entire career. And I moved out of my house with my two kids the same weekend the world shut down. And so it was really this like immediate everything that I thought I was the day before, I felt like I wasn't all of a sudden. And I had to really reestablish who I was and really have this connection to be and start to bridge the gap. And part of that led me down the path to getting that certification in emotional intelligence. I had some other certifications during that time in mindset, and really went down the path of learning more about cognitive neuroscience, which is something I'd always been really passionate in, understanding your brain. And when the time came to come back in the fall for teaching, I decided to stay home and homeschool my own kids, which is another story for another day. But I did that for a year. And during that time, I really had to reckon with, well, what do I want to do in this world? Who do I want to be? And I realized that on my own healing journey, this is the stuff that was missing from education. And we really need to be taking care of the people who take care of our kids. And whether you're a teacher or you're a parent, it all applies. It's all the same thing because business of making generational change. And to avoid kind of that I explained in that very, simple example of making dinner for my family. We do this in ways that are really big and really small and really subtle and sometimes very obvious. And when I can walk through educators into a place where they recognize their agency, recognize their autonomy in their life, understanding that we have choices in every single waking moment of the day, that's how our kids come to see that they too have an agency in the choices that they make. It's not because we tell them, it's because they're watching us. And since I'm at school and my heart is in especially public education, but I certainly work with private education too, we really need to take care of our teachers. And so that's the that really gets a fire going under my butt when I wake up every single day. And I will say one last thing, Jill. Our kids notice. My son, the other day, we were playing ping pong downstairs, and he said, Mom, I see you and I see the way you live your life, and you seem like you're awake. And for a 12-year-old boy to be that aware shocked me. I thought maybe we'd have that conversation when he was 20, but they're watching us. And by me making new choices, it gives him permission to make different choices too.
I love that. That was so beautifully said. And you're absolutely right. If we can change the way that we operate and show up in the world, the ripple effect shows up in areas that we don't even know, but we can definitely expect it to show up in our own households with our kids. And what a gift to be able to give them that knowledge, that skill set, um, early in life, because most of us are fighting to get that in our 30s and 40s, right? Like it's still not as readily available information um, as I would like to see. So well done for doing the work to help the educators and the parents really just step into it and own it, because it really makes a huge difference.
It makes all the difference. We can't expect our kids to know their self-worth if we don't know. And that's what I get emotional thinking about that. And that's really what I do here. This is the goal in working with educators. And, I say educators, but we really work with school communities, which includes school leadership, the bus drivers, the nurses, the custodians, the office staff, and the parents. Because when all of the adults in these kids' lives are speaking the same language and walking the walk, that's really when change starts to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I want to touch on, because it's a buzzword in the media right now, and then I think a lot of people who are exploring this idea of personal growth and self development, and just in general working on your mindset and showing up differently in your life, really intentionally, is toxic positivity. And I know that you are great at explaining the difference between what is just positive psychology and what is toxic positivity, because there's so many people to learn from in this space, and we have to be careful how we interpret and internalize the information that we're working with. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah. So positive psychology is great. It's important. It is research based. When we look at the world through a positive lens, it creates more positive outcomes for us. However, there is a very big caveat to that from where I'm standing, because you can't sprinkle rainbows and sunshine on a turd and expect it to be great for you. It's still a turd. And so we need to acknowledge when we're not feeling okay. We need to lean into the feelings that don't always feel good without bypassing it for the sake of being positive. And so when we're feeling anger, when we're feeling rage, when we're feeling grief, when we're feeling frustration, when we're feeling resentment, none of these things feel good, but it is a gift to our humanity to be able to feel them. And I will also share that capacity to hold things like love and joy and freedom is dependent on your ability to lean in to anger and rage and grief and resentments. And we can't just ignore them and judge them down because they don't feel good. And oftentimes the message that gets skipped over in positive psychology, which then becomes toxic, is we need to just grin and bear it, fake it till you make it, pull yourself together, put a smile on your face, and give yourself some positive affirmations, and everything will be okay. And in fact, that is not how things are okay. Things are okay when we lean into our feelings, acknowledge that feelings are temporary, and that we can then move forward with a reframe when we're ready. And that is a process that, of course, I teach and I go through and I practice myself. But I think the important takeaway here is giving yourself permission to feel whatever it is you need to feel for as long as your body needs to feel it, because that's where the emotions are. They're in your body. And then a reframe can happen in a way that is safe and healthy and productive. And so in my work, I actually very rarely use the word positive or positivity at all. The word that I use is alignment, that we're always operating in alignment. And when you're coming from that place, it gives you some more wiggle room and permission to lean in, because we don't always have to be positive all the time. I'm gonna feel really angry and punch the living daylights out of this punching bag right now, because that's what my body needs to do. And then when that emotion is felt in completion, I can give myself a reframe that feels aligned with how I want to move forward.
Hmm. Very important. What are some of the things that can happen if we skip that step? Like, what are some of the negative things that can show up in our lives? I'm just thinking about the moms who are listening, wondering if maybe they're guilty of this. How would they know? Like what things would be showing up in their life?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, you know, Suppressed emotion leads to all sorts of illness. When you're trying to stuff an elephant into a little teeny tiny box, slippage and seepage, right? And it's going to come out in places that you least expect. It's when you snap at your kids. It's when you get angry at the dog, for being for things, right? It's when you have this headache that hasn't been going away and it's been like 3 weeks and I don't really understand why. It's when you have this debilitating back pain. It's because your body talks to you all the time, but we are generally terrible at listening. And so when your body is saying, "Hey, we need to stop. We need to reevaluate. You need to rest. You need to slow down," and we don't, those messages get louder and louder and louder. And I actually I heard recently on a podcast, I think it was Glennon Doyle's podcast. She had someone on there talking about mom rage. Was actually a perfect example of this, of just not acknowledging what you need. And imagine you felt it was more important that everybody eats before you. And by the end of the day, you don't have any food. And then again, you serve everybody else. And at the end of the day, there's no more food left for you. And by the end of day two, your body's kind of like, hey, Jill, like you probably should eat something right now. But you're like, no, 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 no. Like, okay. So now a week goes by and you haven't eaten anything. And your body is now talking in lots of different ways. Your stomach is growling. You probably have a headache. And you're like, no, 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 no. I'm fine. I have a job to do. I have to show up. I have all these roles I have to play. My kids are more important. Well, now 2 weeks go by, you've had no food and you haven't even acknowledged the fact that you're hungry. Well, what happens? All of a sudden, one little thing just that breaks the camel's back and you explode of absolute rage or breakdown or crying or illness or disease. And that's your body being like, listen, we've been trying to talk to you here. We've been trying to tell you all along, but you haven't listened. And so now here we are because you can't ignore it anymore. And if we don't acknowledge the messages that our body is telling us, we are not able to serve anybody. And that's really the fundamental idea of Empowered Educator is the most generous thing you can do for the people in your life is take care of yourself, period.
Amen.
There is no and, but, or, no. And if that feels activating for you because it doesn't feel true in your head, it feels true in your heart, but not in your head, that is another beautiful moment of awareness of, how can I create more alignment where I really do believe this to be true?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And that example was speaking straight to me because literally I survived on leftover chicken fingers and French fries from my kid's plate for years before I realized. And then I got this like whole body rash and like this whole thing. And at that point is when I started my personal growth journey, right? And I think it's really too bad that us women and moms specifically will let it get that bad. So if you're listening and you made it through the episode and you're like, okay, I'm curious about this. I want to explore this with myself. Like, lean into that and start now because you don't have to wait for crisis moment, right? That's
You
something
don't.
so
All
important.
right. You can wait. You don't have to wait. You can start right this minute.
Yep, totally. And if they
Mhm.
want to get started with you and learn from you, how can they find you? Where are you online? What are you offering for people like us who need some help?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So the easiest places to find me, Instagram is at Jen Rafferty _ and of course, my website at empowerededucator.com. And if you go to the resources page, there's a ton of free resources there for you, including some guided beginner meditations, an energy audit where you can really see where the things are in your life that are draining your energy and what are the things that are really filling you up, and then how then to make adjustments and reframes so you feel great all the time. And we have some really cool offerings coming up. And like I said, we don't only serve educators, we serve entire school communities, which include parents. So we have summer programs starting. We have a summer camp called Redesign Your Mind, which is all about mindset and really reframing our hardwiring in our brains so that we can show up differently, so that then we can be better parents, partners, daughters, mothers, in all of the roles and spaces and places that we're in. So yeah, empowerededucator.com is where you'll find all of that stuff.
Thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing, the resources that you're providing, and that energy audit is something that's calling my name. So I will be going right over to check that out as we finish up. Thank you for being here today. I really appreciate your time. Is there anything that's still on your heart that we haven't gotten to touch on, or anything that feels really important to share before we say goodbye?
Sure, I will just leave everybody with this one last thing. Your self-worth is never up for negotiation. Thing that we've been led to believe is not true, that we have to earn it in some way. We have to keep trying and hustling and working and nose to the grindstone to be worth anything. And that false narrative is perpetuating the same stress cycle really to get out of. So I will leave you with this, and I have this on my desk. I look at it every day. Enough is a decision, not an amount. And
Mm,
you're the only one that gets it's enough.
enough is a decision, not an amount.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure.